Hello and welcome to the Joe Ligato Show. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Ligato, and today we just wanted to make a video just giving you some idea about why China is so easily curb stomping the United States, why they are defeating the United States. And so we see here a post by Godfree Roberts, and this is on China's secret sandwich, talent at the top, data in the middle, and democracy at the bottom, why China leads the world. And we have a table of contents here, and we're just going to go over the table of contents for this book, which I would encourage you to go pick up Godfree Roberts' book. So it starts off with the Party of the People. The Communist Party's 90 million members contribute $1 billion in annual dues and billions of volunteer hours. They took an oath to bear the people's hardships first and enjoy benefits last. So they are a self-sacrificing group that is volunteering a ton of hours to help out their fellow Chinese people. 48,000 of them flew into Wuhan when COVID broke out, and 90% of its staff death were members. Few work for the government and even fewer benefit from membership, yet they determine the country's direction. That's really interesting. So many of them early on in the pandemic, remember that mindset about how concerned, how scared everyone was. These people went out of their way to go into a zone that was under quarantine in order to help as many people as possible. And most of them aren't even working for government, so they're not really getting benefits from it. They're just doing it to help out their fellow citizens. And so there's 90 million of them. Those who please the people. China chooses politicians the way the U.S. chooses. Okay, so this is the second chapter in the table of contents. China chooses politicians the way the U.S. Navy chooses admirals and treats them similarly. Chosen from the top 2% of university graduates, they spend years away from home, are modestly paid, earn PhDs, take orders, perform distasteful missions, observe a restrictive moral code, are held responsible for subordinates' mistakes, constantly assessed, scrutinized, tried in special courts, and punished more severely than civilians. China's elite has always been non-hereditary, and they've been the country's heroes for millennia. Wow, this is so cool of a system. So you have highly intelligent individuals, highly educated individuals. They're held to a higher standard instead of a lower standard. So if you look at the West, one of the major problems of the West is leaders take on all the benefits of leadership without taking on the consequences. They push on the consequences to their subordinates. And we see here that in China, instead of people getting away with things like they did during the 2007-2008 financial crisis, these leaders are held to higher standards. They're punished to a higher degree because they're supposed to be role models for other people. So the third chapter of this book, Data-Driven Democracy. Constitutionally, electively, popularly, procedurally, operationally, substantively, and financially, China is democratic. The Carter Center oversees elections. Voter participation is higher than ours, and in surveys after survey, they trust their government and say it responds to their needs. So it's about 3 times the amount of people trust their government versus the United States. In the United States, it's about 30%. In China, it's about 90% of people trust their government. And so when you're talking about the government being for the people, exemplifying the beliefs of the people, responding to the needs of the people, China clearly, by leaps and bounds, has more trust, is regarded as more valuable to the people than in the United States. I've talked about this in other videos where in the Judeo-Islamic War 2023, Americans 66% wanted a ceasefire, with something like 80% of Democrats wanting a ceasefire, and the Democratic government in charge of the country right now, Joe Biden's government, they are not calling for a ceasefire. They say you're not allowed to call for de-escalation. You can't say you want to avoid bloodshed. You're not allowed to call for a ceasefire whatsoever. And so you have a government that is not representing the will of the people right now, especially in that one regard where Palestinians are literally being genocided. So the next chapter, red hot economy. For 70 years, China's economy has grown 3 times faster than the United States, and by 2028 it will be twice as big. They spend 4 times more on research and development and lead the world in science and technology. Yeah, obviously that's the case. China is progressing in every way that matters. Then the next chapter is the granary is full because Beijing allocates 59% of GDP to wages. Incomes have outgrown GDP for decades. And by 2023, 96% of people owned a home, far higher than America. If you're in America right now, you know that home ownership is at all-time lows. People are just not able to purchase homes anymore. And people aren't even able to afford rent. So people just aren't able to afford to live. And we know from studies that showed that compensation and productivity has been decoupled since about the 1970s. So your productivity has gone up in America, but your compensation has not gone up roughly equivalent. We see that, what else? People are able to afford food there. They get cheap education, safe streets, health care. So their life expectancy is higher than in America. They get old age pension. Their mothers and infants survive childbirth better than in America. Their children graduate school 3 years ahead of ours and live longer and healthier lives. There are now more drug addicts, suicides, and executions, more homeless, poor, hungry, and imprisoned people in America than in China. So China is, I think it's something like 4 times the population of America, but in absolute numbers, America has far more, in absolute numbers and in percentages, America has far more of all of these horrendous things going on. So clearly, in every metric that matters, China is doing better than America. I know the propaganda tells you otherwise in America. That is just not factually true. It's just not. It really isn't. I've had people who have been so indoctrinated about China, they're like, what if China is lying about its like trade with other nations, the amount of money, the amount of exports it has, things like that? And I'm like, do you understand what that means? China trades with 200 nations of the world. I believe there's a little over 200 nations, if I remember correctly. And they trade with all these nations. You're telling me that every single one of those nations is going to lie about their trade volume with China in order to help China, like, just fake their numbers. Like, that's just not how things work. And the funny thing is, the weird thing is, Americans just don't realize how propagandized they are in an anti-China way. Then they talk about things like fertility rate, which is low all across the Western world, and United States and other nations are having to import a lot of immigrants in order to make up for the deficit in fertility. China really doesn't have to worry about that. One, because they can pivot their fertility rate when they need to with incentives that they're able to do a lot better than America. Two, because they're going towards robotics and automation, so they don't need as many people to produce the goods that they're producing. So anyways, a little bit of a side rant there, but in every way that matters, China is doing better than the United States. Okay, so next up is a chapter on a San Francisco every month. China has built the equivalent of one San Francisco every month since 1951. Now they're building city version 2.0, a clean, green home for 6 million people that integrates 5G, driverless electronic cars, maglev trains, vast wetlands, and prevailing winds. Designed to pay for itself by doubling inhabitants' productivity, it opens in 2024. So China, constantly evolving, constantly growing, unlike America, which is constantly declining, constantly suffering. The next chapter of this book, Education, Chinese youngsters graduate high school 3 years ahead of ours. Tier 1 urban teachers are limited to 15 hours of classroom instruction weekly, and their principals have chauffeured limousines and overseas sabbaticals that take education more seriously than heart attacks. So China far exceeds American education. I worked in higher education in America, and higher education, all education in America is declining. It's horrendous. The next chapter, Lost Girls in Half the Sky. The first bill Mao, a lifelong women's liberations advocate, signed in 1949 was the Equal Rights Amendment. The missing 30 million girls have been found beating boys in school, and their big sisters lead gigantic science and defense programs and comprise most of the world's self-made female billionaires. Next chapter, religion. 2/3 of Chinese are atheists and 1/4 non-religious Taoist. Though a Christian uprising killed 30 million people and brought down the Qing dynasty, the Constitution guarantees freedom of worship, and the government supports 74 seminaries, 1,700 Tibetan monasteries, 3,000 religious organizations, 39,000 mosques, 85,000 religious sites, and 300,000 clergy. So just taking one of those for a second, 1,700 Tibetan monasteries, people always talk about how Tibet needs to be freed from China. China treats Tibet horrendously. But if you actually ask the Chinese people, the Tibetan people of China, they actually have more Mao posters than anyone else in China because they're so thankful for being freed from the Tibetan warlords that kept them as serfs. And the population was heavily illiterate. Now they have a ton of opportunities. So if you ask the average person there, their lives are completely different from the propaganda. Next chapter is on Confucian ethics and rule of law of all government services. The Chinese are happiest with their legal system. With 1/4 of our security budget, their police are unarmed, streets are safe, prisons are empty, and reoffense is rare. The Supreme Court's chatty website has had 2 billion visitors. So just taking that first one for a second, all systems of government are supposed to satisfy the people's needs. Okay? People are not happy with the judicial branch. They're not happy with any branches of our government in America. But in China, they are satisfied because their government represents them. Their government meets the needs of the people. Next is Earth is My Mother chapter. The Chinese have lived on the same land for thousands of years, and it's more productive today than ever. Thanks to the EPA, they avoided our environmental disasters and emulated our successes. Today, 42% of the country is wilderness, and Giant Panda National Park alone is bigger than Massachusetts. I did not know that last part. But China is very successful. And if you went there a couple decades ago, you might have seen the amount of smog, the amount of toxins in the air. But they've really innovated to make sure that they skip that step in growth in the Industrial Revolution. Where in America, there were safety standards, there were hazards that went on for decades. China pivoted away from that in about a decade. And so if you went there 20 years ago and then you go today, from what I understand, China is a far different country because they've gone past the worst parts of the Industrial Revolution very quickly. The next chapter of this book, Human Rights, of the original 30 rights in the UN Declaration, China leads America in 26 and has proposed 3 that the US opposes, which are, get this, the rights to food, shelter, and national development. So America opposes those. You don't have a right to food. In China, you have a right to food. So, I mean, if you want to be successful in a nation, if you want to contribute to a nation, you have to be able to feed yourself. America doesn't agree with that. China does agree with that. So which side are you on? Do you think children should have food or not? Okay. If you're in America, your government thinks that children should not have food. If you're in China, your government thinks that you should have food. So just, there's clear dividing lines between good and evil. It's not just gray areas here. In terms of corruption, the government, so this is another chapter, the government which tells the truth and keeps its promises is the most trusted on earth. Though many local officials become dishonest during the boom, policy making remained untouched. Now AI and a dedicated cabinet level anti-corruption department have the upper hand. So they've been working on their corruption nonstop. Next chapter is on propaganda. Transforming the people through exemplary behavior and instruction has been a government responsibility since ancient times. China's success in rolling out new programs depends on it. So China, when they use their propaganda, it's meant to inform you and help you to be a better citizen, to contribute to the nation state. When America uses propaganda, it's trying to, say, get you addicted to Sackler opioids or get you to purchase unhealthy food so you're dependent on the healthcare system for the rest of your lives and you're constantly paying into that system. So American propaganda, every country does propaganda in different ways. China's propaganda is to make you a better person. American propaganda is meant to get you to be stuck into the system, constantly paying into the system for the rest of your life in every way that matters. So pick your poison, okay? Do you want to be a better person or do you want to be suffering for the rest of your life in order to generate the energy for a horrendous demonic system? Next chapter, discussion is suspended. The office of chief censor is 2,000 years old, and its incumbent is and has always been the country's leading intellectual. So for them, they have a very rich, continuous tradition, and they have historical precedences for many of their offices within modern communist China. And so they call themselves communists, but they really have developed and grown from their historical traditions and figure out what works and what doesn't over many millennia. Okay, so today this person's a famous author and also a cabinet member. He oversees the world's largest, they're talking about the officer of chief censor. He oversees the world's largest, richest, and most trusted media, and his mandate is constitutional. Once a policy has been widely discussed, voted on, and legislated, discussion is suspended while everyone unites to implement it. So that's how things really should be. So I'm going to highlight this so people understand this. But in the United States, whenever something is done, whenever a decision is made, people don't unite around it. They work to sabotage it if they disagree with it. In China, whenever things have been voted on, it's been decided, everyone unites around that decision and does its best to make sure that that decision is implemented as effectively as possible. And it's just a different way of functioning where you don't see the people you disagree with as enemies who you're supposed to undermine as much as possible. And obviously, it's a more effective system. Okay, so we're almost done here. So the Tiananmen caper. Inflation, raised sex wages, and loss of university scholarships triggered the Tiananmen Square demonstration. President Clinton discussed it on Chinese national television for an hour, but the story ended with an in-camera trial in London's Crown Court. I'm going to be interested to see what they're doing with that chapter. I know that the propaganda around the Tiananmen Square is not accurate for what actually happened during that day, but I would love to read further about this in Godfree Roberts' book. Tibet and the Dalai Lama chapter. More Tibetans can read and write their native language today than all the Tibetans who have ever lived, and those who have lived under both the governments prefer the current one. Running water, schools, universities, hospitals, airports, high-speed train, and 40 years of rising wages have made a difference, as has the Lhasa Hilton. I don't know what that last part is, but yeah, that's what I was saying earlier about Tibetans being so much better off under the current Chinese government than prior one, and how much they love it. Like, what if they like the current government? Why are you trying to overthrow the current government? It's obviously not for their interests; it's for your own American hegemonic interests. So next up is the chapter on hegemony and humane authority. China's military, which humiliated ours in 1951, has more firepower than the U.S., but plans to lead the world by virtuous example. Failing that, they'll blow the U.S. Navy out of the water with weapons a generation ahead of ours. And that's completely true. People don't realize it, but China is working on version 2 of hypersonic missiles, and they've tested it. It seems to be functional. The United States still cannot get hypersonic missiles. Like, United States, various organizations are just completely incompetent at this point. Like, they just don't function anymore. Russia has hypersonic missiles too, so there are multiple nations that are capable of hypersonic missiles, and the United States is still not even capable of it, while these other nations have 2.0 version, they're working on 2.0, etc., etc. So last chapter, a Detong world. 10 years ago, President Xi founded the Belt and Road Initiative, which I talked about having a Silk Road 2 before this. I threw that information out on the ether, and hopefully someone picked it up. If they didn't, they went with the ideas I had anyway, so that's nice. I don't talk about this enough, but like 10 years ago, I had multiple ideas that I thought Russia and China should have gone with. And I just kind of posted these on online forums. I made sure to get the word out as far and wide as possible. And it seems like either someone heard it or someone concurrently had the same ideas, because things like the Belt and Road Initiative came about. I called it Silk Road 2.0. But anyways, Belt and Road Initiative promising to jointly promote democratization of international relations by building an open, inclusive, clean, and beautiful world that enjoys lasting peace, universal security, and common prosperity, a world community of common destiny, a shared planet home for humanity. Oh, and I should mention, the reason I initially wanted a Silk Road 2.0 was because the United States was trying its best to close off and blockade China by sea. And so if China was not able to win in the South China Sea, which it looks like they're going to win anyways, they at least had land-based routes to trade and get the supplies it needs for its own country. So they had a plan and then a backup plan. And that's exactly what I suggested, exactly what I recommended. And it ended up happening. So high five to me. Woo. Okay. So that's where I'll leave you at. This is Godfree Roberts' book, just a summary of the table of contents. And I would encourage you to go pick up this book. It seems very interesting. It has a ton of interesting chapters. I obviously, as a data scientist, would love for him to have talked more about data science, but that's okay. We could have separate books on that. I'm sure there's a ton of that. But anyways, check out this book. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this, please give us a thumbs up. It helps us in the algorithm. Please subscribe to our channel on YouTube and Rumble for more content. And leave us a comment in the comment box below. Comments, questions, concerns, critiques. I love reading all of them, even the hate mail. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye.